My name is Michael. I am 34 years old, and I am standing in the middle of a freezing, glass-walled conference room in downtown Seattle, staring at a termination letter that feels heavier than a block of lead. My business partner, David, a 45-year-old man who I trusted with my livelihood, just slid this piece of paper across the polished mahogany table. The ink on the paper is black, but all I see is red. He agreed to give me 50% of our tech company in a legally binding document, a piece of paper I have locked in my safe at home. But today, exactly 24 hours before we were supposed to sign a $50 million acquisition deal with the biggest software giant in the country, he is firing me. The air in the room is suffocating. My heart is pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, and a cold sweat is breaking out on the back of my neck. I can see the smug, arrogant smirk hiding behind his perfectly manicured beard. He thinks he has won. He thinks he found the perfect loophole to steal my life's work and leave me with absolutely nothing. Every late night, every missed holiday, every sacrifice flashed before my eyes, turning into a bitter, humiliating joke. I feel a sickening twist in my stomach, a paralyzing mix of profound shock and absolute rage. I am completely speechless, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I reach for the document. But what David does not know is that I have a devastating secret of my own. Before I dive deeper into the darkest and most vindicating chapter of my entire existence, I want to take a brief moment to ask you something. I always find it absolutely fascinating to know how far my voice is traveling. So tell me in the comments, what city and state or country are you listening to my story from right now? It brings me a strange sense of comfort knowing I am connecting with people from all over the world. Now, to truly make you understand the sheer magnitude of this monumental betrayal and the explosive retribution that followed, I need to take you back exactly 4 years. I need to take you back to the very beginning, to a cramped, poorly ventilated garage in the suburbs where this multi-million-dollar empire was born out of nothing but a cheap laptop, a massive amount of student debt, and a desperately ambitious dream to change the world. 4 years ago, I was just a hungry, struggling software developer, working freelance gigs to barely pay the rent. My wife, Sarah, who is 33 years old, was working double shifts as a registered nurse just to keep food on our table. We were drowning in financial obligations and living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of every unexpected bill. That was when I came up with an algorithm, a unique data compression software that could revolutionize how large hospitals manage patient records. I knew the code was brilliant. I knew it was a game changer, but I had absolutely no idea how to sell it. I had no industry connections, no venture capital, and no real business acumen. That was when a mutual acquaintance introduced me to David. David was an established investor, a smooth-talking executive who wore custom-tailored suits and drove a luxury car. From the moment he walked into our local coffee shop for our first meeting, he exuded an aura of absolute power and unshakable confidence. I remember sitting across from him, nervously wiping the sweat off my palms onto my faded jeans. I pitched my software, stumbling over my words, but his eyes lit up with a predatory hunger. He immediately saw the immense financial potential. Right there, over 2 lukewarm cups of dark roast coffee, we struck a deal. He would provide the initial funding, secure the office space, and handle all the marketing and networking. I would be the sole architect, the brain behind the machine, building the complex software from the ground up. He looked me dead in the eyes, shook my hand firmly, and guaranteed me half of everything we built together. We signed a contract a week later. I remember rushing home to Sarah, bursting through the front door and lifting her off the ground in a tight, emotional embrace. We cried together in our tiny living room, truly believing that all our grueling financial struggles were finally coming to a permanent and beautiful end. But the reality of building a tech startup is a brutal, soul-crushing marathon that tests every fiber of your being. For the first 2 years, my life was a chaotic blur of glowing monitors and empty energy drink cans. While David was out flying first class to elite tech conferences in San Francisco and New York, dining at 5-star restaurants, and shaking hands with industry giants, I was locked inside a windowless office building. I worked 18-hour days, completely isolated from the outside world. I missed Sarah's 30th birthday because a critical database bug crashed our main server, and I had to spend 48 hours straight rewriting thousands of lines of complex code. I remember calling her at midnight, my voice cracking with deep exhaustion and profound guilt, apologizing profusely. She was incredibly supportive, telling me she understood, but I could hear the deep, agonizing disappointment in her gentle voice. That guilt ate away at my soul every single day. The monumental breakthrough finally happened in our third year of relentless grinding. A massive healthcare conglomerate, Apex Medical Solutions, caught wind of our revolutionary software. They had been struggling with a catastrophic data management crisis across their national network, and our program was the exact magical cure they desperately needed. They formally requested a live, high-stakes demonstration. I spent 3 agonizing weeks preparing, barely sleeping more than 2 hours a night. When the day of the presentation arrived, I was running on pure, unfiltered adrenaline. I stood in front of a terrifying board of stern executives and ran the complex simulation. The software performed absolutely flawlessly. It processed their massive, convoluted database in a mere fraction of the time it normally took their outdated systems. The room was stunned into absolute pin-drop silence. Then the powerful CEO of Apex stood up and started clapping slowly. We had captured the ultimate prize. The corporate negotiations moved with blinding, dizzying speed. Apex did not just want to license our software for their hospitals, they wanted to buy the entire company outright to control the market. They offered us a staggering $50 million. When David called me into his luxurious corner office to show me the official term sheet, my knees completely buckled beneath me. I literally had to sit down on his expensive leather sofa just to catch my breath and stop my hands from shaking. $25 million would be rightfully mine. My mind instantly raced to Sarah and the life we could finally build. We could finally pay off our crushing debts, buy a beautiful home with a large backyard, start a family without the suffocating terror of financial ruin, and never have to worry about counting pennies at the grocery store ever again. David poured 2 glasses of incredibly expensive scotch, handed me one, and confidently toasted to our imminent, life-altering wealth. Then came that fateful Thursday. The day right before the life-altering signing was supposed to take place. I arrived at the office exceptionally early, carrying a large box of expensive pastries for the entire development team to celebrate our monumental victory. The office was eerily, uncomfortably quiet. David's executive assistant nervously told me he was waiting for me in the main conference room. I walked in, foolishly expecting a final, joyful review of the celebratory logistics for Friday. Instead, I found David sitting rigidly at the head of the long table, flanked by 2 formidable men I had never seen before in my life. They wore immaculate, intimidating gray suits and carried thick, expensive leather briefcases. The atmosphere in the room was chillingly cold and incredibly hostile. The box of pastries in my hand suddenly felt incredibly heavy. My heart rate accelerated with a sudden, dreadful premonition of impending doom. David coldly slid a thick, ominous manila folder across the smooth surface of the table toward me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a strained whisper, echoing in the silent room. "It is your termination package," he replied smoothly, his eyes completely dead, looking at me as if I were a worthless stranger on the street. "Effective immediately, you are permanently removed from your position as lead developer, and your employment with this company is officially terminated." My exhausted brain violently short-circuited. I stared at him blankly, desperately waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to laugh and tell me it was a cruel, terrible joke. But the room remained deathly, suffocatingly silent. "You cannot fire me," I stammered, my chest tightening painfully as the panic set in. "I am your equal partner. We have a written contract. I own 50% of this entire company." David leaned forward, a deeply patronizing smile playing on his lips. The lawyer seated to his right, a rigid man with cold, unblinking eyes, opened his heavy briefcase and pulled out a pristine copy of our original employment and partnership contract. Section 4, paragraph 12, the lawyer stated in a robotic, emotionless monotone. "Employment is strictly contingent upon meeting specified developmental milestones within the allocated quarterly financial budget. Furthermore, equity vesting is conditional upon continuous, uninterrupted employment up to the absolute date of any corporate acquisition." David looked at me, feigning a sickening look of profound sympathy. "You missed the budget by 12% during the massive server crash 2 years ago, Michael. Technically, you blatantly breached the contract. I let it slide because we desperately needed the product finished, but legally, I have the absolute right to terminate you for cause. And since you are being terminated before the acquisition is finalized tomorrow, your equity is completely forfeited." I felt like I had been violently struck in the chest by a speeding freight train. The entire room started spinning uncontrollably. He had planned this. He had carefully, meticulously orchestrated this exact moment for years. He used my relentless dedication, my late nights, and my absolute exhaustion entirely against me. The server crash was an unforeseeable emergency, a massive disaster that I fixed by working myself half to death. And now he was using it as a twisted legal weapon to rob me of $25 million. "You were stealing my life!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, slamming my fists onto the mahogany table so hard the wood groaned loudly. "I built this! Every single line of code in that software is mine!" David did not even flinch. He just calmly sipped his sparkling water and told me to take the severance package. I absolutely refused to sign anything. I violently shoved the manila folder off the table, sending legal papers scattering chaotically across the floor, and stormed out of the conference room. I frantically packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box while my coworkers stared awkwardly at their shoes. The agonizing walk to my car was the longest, most humiliating walk of my entire life. When I finally sat behind the steering wheel of my beat-up sedan, the emotional dam completely broke, and I sobbed uncontrollably. Walking through my own front door felt exactly like walking to my own grim execution. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune, happily packing a picnic basket to celebrate our last weekend as financially struggling people. When she turned around and saw my face, pale, devastated, and heavily streaked with tears, the basket slipped from her hands and crashed loudly onto the floor. She rushed over, grabbing my face with trembling hands. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, pulling her down with me, and I sobbed uncontrollably like a broken child. I told her absolutely everything. I told her about the vicious lawyers, the hidden loophole, the monumental betrayal, and the devastating loss of the $25 million. I fully expected her to be furious, to yell at me for being so incredibly stupid and trusting. But she didn't. She just held me tightly, rocking me back and forth on the hard linoleum floor, crying silently into my trembling shoulder. For the next 3 excruciating days, I existed in a dark state of catatonic depression. I did not shower, I did not eat, I barely drank any water. I just lay in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, agonizingly replaying the meeting in the conference room over and over in my tortured mind. The official news of the acquisition hit the major financial websites on Friday afternoon. Apex Medical Solutions officially acquires DataStream for $50 million. There were glossy pictures of David, grinning wildly like a conquering hero, shaking hands with the powerful Apex executives. He was being globally hailed as a brilliant tech visionary. Every single article I forced myself to read felt like a fresh, jagged knife twisting deep into my guts. He had actually won. The greedy villain had actually won, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. The lawyers I frantically called all said fighting him would bankrupt me completely. But late on the 4th night, something fundamental shifted deep inside my brain. I was sitting in the pitch dark in my home office, staring intensely at my dual glowing monitors, looking at an old archived backup file of the DataStream source code. I was torturing myself, looking at the thousands of hours of my stolen life. As I scrolled aimlessly through the core mathematical architecture, my tired eyes caught a very specific string of characters. A very unique, highly encrypted security protocol I had secretly implemented during the 2nd year of development. It was an administrative backdoor, a brilliant fail-safe mechanism I designed to prevent catastrophic data corruption during massive server migrations. Only I knew about it. Only I possessed the master encryption key. And more importantly, I suddenly remembered a very specific, crucial conversation I had with an intellectual property attorney before I even met David, back when the algorithm was just a raw concept. My heart started to beat faster, a frantic, thumping rhythm of desperate, dangerous hope. I started digging frantically through my old email archives, searching for a specific correspondence from 4 years ago. It took me 3 grueling hours of manic searching, but I finally found it. It was an official patent application receipt. Before I ever signed the disastrous partnership agreement with David, before the company even officially existed on paper, I had filed a provisional patent for the absolute core mathematical algorithm that powered the entire compression engine. It was registered solely under my name, Michael, as an independent individual entity. When David and I formed the company acquired the rights to the software application interface, but the foundational algorithm, the literal beating heart of the complex code, was legally mine. I had never formally transferred the underlying intellectual property rights. David's fancy, expensive lawyers had completely missed it. I jumped out of my office chair, a wild, manic energy surging powerfully through my veins. The crushing depression vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly focused rage. David had maliciously stolen my car, but I still held the only set of keys to the engine, and I could shut it off and crash the vehicle whenever I wanted. I ran into the bedroom, shaking Sarah awake at 3 in the morning. I was pacing around the room like a madman, excitedly explaining the legal technicality, the hidden patent, and the master encryption key. She sat up, wiping the sleep from her eyes, her expression slowly transforming from deep confusion to a fierce, dangerous determination. "So, what does this actually mean for us?" she asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. "It means," I smiled, a dark, vengeful smile. "It means David just sold a $50 million empty box, and I am about to burn his life down." The very next morning, I did not just call a regular run-of-the-mill lawyer. I relentlessly tracked down Richard Vance, a 60-year-old intellectual property litigator who was famous in Seattle for completely destroying massive tech corporations in federal court. He was incredibly expensive, viciously aggressive, and utterly ruthless. I took out a massive second mortgage on our house, risking absolutely everything we had left in the world just to pay his immense retainer fee. When I sat in his plush, leather-bound office and laid out the patent documents, the original fraudulent contract, and the source code architecture, Richard leaned back in his heavy chair and let out a low, deeply impressed whistle. "Your former partner is an absolute, arrogant idiot," Richard chuckled deeply, his eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. "He sold a product he does not actually own. If Apex tries to integrate this, it is a ticking time bomb." Richard swiftly drafted a devastating cease and desist order, but we absolutely did not send it to David. Sending it to David would give him precious time to panic and try to negotiate a quiet, pathetic settlement. No, we wanted maximum, highly visible destruction. We sent the explosive legal notice directly to the immense legal department of Apex Medical Solutions, completely bypassing David entirely. The notice clearly stated that the core algorithmic property of DataStream was owned exclusively by me, that the recent acquisition was fundamentally fraudulent, and that any attempt to utilize the software would result in immediate, catastrophic federal litigation for massive intellectual property theft. We mailed it on a Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, the massive shockwave hit. My cell phone started ringing endlessly. First, it was David. I watched his name flash on the screen over and over again. I let it ring, enjoying his mounting panic. Around noon the next day, David aggressively showed up at my house. He did not look like the arrogant, perfectly groomed conqueror I had seen in the conference room. His expensive silk tie was loose, his hair was a chaotic mess, and he was sweating profusely. He pounded furiously on my front door like a madman. I calmly opened it, stepping out onto the porch, intentionally leaving the heavy screen door locked between us. "What the hell did you do, Michael?" he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Apex just completely frozen the entire acquisition fund. Their legal team is threatening to sue me for federal fraud."
"You need to rescind that letter right now." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold wave of complete contempt. "I cannot do that, David," I said calmly. He started begging pathetically on my front porch. "Michael, please, I will give you your 50%. We can go back to being partners." The sheer desperation in his wide eyes was pathetic. "You do not have 50% to give me anymore, David," I replied, my voice turning to absolute ice. "You own a completely useless user interface. I own the powerful engine, and I am not selling it to you." I turned my back on him and firmly locked the door. 2 incredibly tense days later, I was formally invited to a highly private meeting in a massive glass skyscraper downtown. It was directly with the powerful executive board of Apex Medical Solutions. I walked into the luxurious boardroom with Richard Vance confidently by my side. The CEO, the exact same man who had clapped for me during the initial demonstration, looked extremely displeased, but deeply respectful of my immense leverage. They had run their own extensive technical analysis and realized I was telling the absolute, undeniable truth. The acquired software was completely useless without my proprietary algorithm. They were absolutely furious at David for wasting their valuable time and legally exposing their corporation. "We want the software, Michael," the CEO said, getting straight to the point. "It is crucial for us." "What are your terms?" I sat down, calmly folding my hands. "My terms are incredibly simple," I stated clearly.
You cancel the acquisition deal with David entirely. You leave him with his empty shell of a worthless company. Then, you purchase the exclusive licensing rights directly from me. And the price is absolutely no longer $25 million. It is $40 million. And a guaranteed position as the Senior Director of Architectural Development. Richard smiled as the silent room processed my absolute victory. They agreed without a single moment of hesitation. The complex paperwork was drawn up meticulously by their legal team, ensuring there were absolutely no loopholes, no hidden traps for me to fall into. I signed the massive documents, officially transferring the rights and legally securing my staggering new fortune. The immediate fallout for David was absolute, apocalyptic destruction. Apex not only completely pulled out of his fraudulent deal, but they also viciously sued him for breach of contract and severe misrepresentation, seeking millions in punitive damages to cover their extensive legal expenses. Because David had foolishly, personally guaranteed the validity of the intellectual property in his initial negotiations, he was held entirely personally liable. His venture capital firm dropped him instantly. His wealthy investors, furious at his immense blunder, turned their backs on him forever. In less than 6 months, he declared total bankruptcy.
He tragically lost his expensive exotic cars, his luxurious downtown penthouse, and his entire formidable reputation in the tech industry. I, on the other hand, walked into the massive Apex headquarters on my very first day as senior director, feeling a profound, deeply overwhelming sense of absolute vindication. Sarah and I paid off every single cent of our crushing debt within 24 hours of the massive funds clearing our bank account. We bought that beautiful house with the big backyard we had always desperately dreamed of. But the staggering amount of money, while incredibly life-changing, was absolutely not the most satisfying part of this entire ordeal. The most satisfying part was knowing that I had fiercely stood my ground. I had been maliciously pushed to the absolute edge of the abyss, betrayed by someone I deeply trusted, and instead of falling in, I fought back. Looking back on everything that happened, the biggest lesson I learned is that blind trust is the most dangerous liability a person can have in the professional world. I learned the hard way that a person's true character is only revealed when there is a massive amount of money on the table, and that you must always relentlessly protect your own immense value, no matter who you are dealing with. I built a fortress around my life, and I will never let anyone tear it down again. After hearing all of this, what would you have done in my exact situation?
Would you have fought back the way I did, or would you have just taken the severance money and walked away quietly? Let me know your thoughts down below. Until the next story.